What was George Washington's reputation when he arrived at the Continental Congress? Hi, Founder fans, Jason here. And today, our founder is going to be the General George Washington. Now, I was watching a video this weekend, actually I was listening to a video while I was doing dishes, about a biography on General George Washington's life. It was from the People Profiles, which is a YouTube channel. The video is about 45 minutes. It's called George Washington Documentary, Biography of the Life of George Washington. I'll put a link in the description below because it was really informative. I think you might enjoy it. It focuses mostly on his early life and kind of breezes through the later part, but it also gives a good overview of the war itself. And it's interesting to hear a British person talk about the British with negative connotations. But either way, so George Washington, as a younger man, joined the Virginia militia, and he became a colonel. And he went out on an expedition before the French and Indian War broke out to tell some French and Native Americans, mostly the French, to be honest, that they were treading on what was perceived to be British property. Things didn't go so well. Some shots were fired, and the French and Indian War broke out. And the French and Indian War actually turned into the 7 Years' War, which Winston Churchill once called the First World War. And it's all because George Washington couldn't really control, not his men, but the Native Americans that were associated with him. And so, whoopsie-daisy, George Washington. Anyway, he runs into more trouble. He builds Fort Necessity out where Pittsburgh is now, and he runs into more trouble out there. Eventually, he comes home kind of with his head hanging low, and his reputation is kind of shot. Now, he's still a young man. He's in his early 20s at this point, and many people would have resigned their commission, but Washington wanted to prove himself. He wanted to be a military man. And therefore, as the French and Indian War escalates, General Braddock goes on an expedition and brings a whole bunch of militia out west to fight the French and the Indians in the French and Indian War. And he actually brings George Washington as an aide-de-camp because Washington had still been trying to redeem his reputation. He was known for honesty as an upright citizen, and he also was very familiar with the area, which helped him earn the right to be on General Braddock's, an aide-de-camp to Braddock. So they start going west, but they end up getting ambushed by the French and Indians and slaughtered, and even Braddock is killed in the expedition. But Washington takes control of the situation and oversees an orderly retreat. A retreat, yes, but it was orderly, which was very important back then because it demonstrated that you had control of your army. So they retreat and come back, and even though things don't look so great, Washington's reputation has been redeemed. Now, in this documentary, they did mention how there were about 2 million people in the British colonies and only about 100,000 people in New France. So it was a numbers game. Eventually, the British were going to win this war. So fortunately, Washington stayed with it and redeemed his reputation, and the war was won. And he resigns and goes back home, and some years go by, and the American Revolution breaks out, and George Washington shows up at the Continental Congress, being one of the few people who was now known outside of his colony, because his efforts had been such that he earned renown for his work. Despite an early setback to his reputation, he kept working and became famous. Most people who went to the Continental Congress were known in their state, but very few were famous in the other colonies, let alone Great Britain. And Washington's name was known. And he showed up to the Continental Congress and reminded them that his name was known because he wore his uniform, his military uniform. And that is essentially why John Adams and a few other people decided to nominate George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. He had some experience, and he had been a native-born American, because the other people who may have gotten that position, most of them had been born in Britain. They had moved to America. Horatio Gates and Charles Lee, and men of that nature, had moved to America and were Americans now and fighting for America. But George Washington was native-born and had that fame. So, as they say, his reputation preceded him. That's a little bit about George Washington. I hope I inspired you to learn more about him. There is so much to know. And like I said, I'm going to leave a link in the description. The biography is fun. I really suggest you check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with another founder tomorrow.